Welcome everybody, this is Denny and Karl with GetWisdom, and today we're going to continue with our channeling series. And today we have a subject that was a little difficult for me at the outset, and I guess remains so a bit because of the controversy around this person. And he's a pretty recent figure in terms of history, and that's Michael Jackson. And so I have 5 questions for him today. Of course, the most recent thing in most people's minds will be the documentary that was put out not too long ago called Leaving Neverland, where they had a couple of fellows come forth as victims of him in a pedophilia episode later in his life. And so a lot of people have seen that. It caused a lot of changes in how people view him, his fortunes with his legacy and his family, and the way people view his music now. There's radio stations that won't play his music anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's our subject for today. And Karl's got some things to share. I have some things to share as a prequel to us actually starting the channeling session. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially you, Karl, for doing this with us every week. And so you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Denny, and thanks to all of you watching this. This is for you, and we're always curious about the world and looking into lots of different things, and usually with more than one agenda in mind. I like to start from the big picture in everything that I do, because everything does fit sort of like a puzzle piece into that grand scheme. And it's true of us in our lives. And if you pull back, you'll see you have a series of lives, and it's all working towards something. And so there's a lot of ways to jump in and focus. And people in their struggles with life have much to teach one another. And that's the main thing we get out of going to people from the past, in the sense that they're gone now. They're back in the light, and we have a chance to see them as they truly are, as a larger spiritual being, and with a broad past, as well as a new perspective about their more recent life that we knew of as a person here sharing the planet with us. And as a light being, they'll think differently about the events of their time, and they'll have some things to teach us if we go asking. And that's what we're after here with Michael Jackson, to get a better feel for what his life means. People have a different perspective depending on their distance from him, closeness to him, dependence on him, and faith in him as a compatriot and a collaborator, or whatever the case might be, or just a fan who was very loving of him and devoted to him and appreciated his artistry and so on. And when someone has a dark side and it comes to light, it's such a disappointment for a lot of people. It's shocking, it's distressing, and it will trigger those many others who have gone through something like that. And it just opens up the can of worms again. And one of the sad things about the subject of abuse is people don't get solutions, typically in this world. They may talk to a therapist. By and large, that doesn't help them very much. It gives them an outlet, someone they can talk to safely when maybe there's no one else in their life they can be intimately involved with and share the deep, dark secrets of their past and so forth. But that doesn't truly heal anything. It is a coping mechanism more than a therapy, truly, because it's the deep inner wounding that matters. And people typically don't get a resolution for that unless they go to a technique that's capable of resolving the trauma. There are techniques like that available. Denny and I both use techniques that can do that. So we're working with people with this kind of history of being abused. And I've worked with many clients who have gone through that tragedy, and it's quite devastating. And when healing can be brought, that can rein it in and help the person move forward. But if they don't have access to that gift, then it's a lifelong struggle for them, and even a struggle in future lifetimes. And this people are completely unaware of.
Right.
Once someone's been abused, karma will bring that back around to them, sometimes with the same perpetrator. And it's an opportunity to fix it. Sometimes it does get addressed, usually imperfectly, because a future life doesn't mean you're going to be in a better culture where true healing techniques are available to people widely. It hasn't been true through all of history. And I'm not expecting that's going to change rapidly right now. People are gaining knowledge and expertise here. Whether that'll be transmitted into future generations remains to be seen. So this is a big, long drama that is no small thing. It is a major influence on the psyche and influencing all the people around the victim and the perpetrator as well, because it taints them, it corrupts their soul, and their karma will haunt them much more severely than is true for the victim. So a perpetrator of abuse may well have multiple lifetimes of victimhood as a way of making restitution for what they did to satisfy the law of cause and effect. That is demanded by the universe. It's an energetic thing that is designed to keep everything in balance. Mm-hmm. It's not God's judgment. It's not human judgment. It is an energetic necessity that's seen to by this law of physics, really, that the perpetrator and the victim both must come back into balance some way, and it's got to come from somewhere. And so it'll come from their energy to some degree. And that is how it gets accomplished. But it can be ugly, and it can be a long struggle.
Right.
So we want to learn what we can from Michael Jackson about all this, and
right.
his perspective about his life, what he can teach us now that he's looking back on it all.
Yeah.
And what he might have to say to the world. We're not here to cast judgment and to try to make a reckoning of it and do a forensic investigation and so forth. Right. That really isn't the way to move towards healing of things. Each person touched by his life will need healing in some way, I'm guessing, assuming this is all true. And that'll be in part his burden as well, and so maybe he'll speak to that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, try to anticipate really what he might want to say to us, but that's my own perspective of what's at stake here.
Yeah.
And it's a major issue. I've had clients who were abused as infants, and then up through their first several years, and it's devastating. It's devastating what happens to these people. They're never the same until they can get a full healing resolution for that trauma. And that's rare in this world that it can happen, because very few can do the techniques yet that are capable of making that whole again for them. So,
yeah. So
Michael, the one thing I wanted to point out is that I'm not a long-term fan of his. I appreciated his talent, and I mentioned to Denny just before we started chatting that I saw a moment recently in a retrospective where he was out of character to me. He was doing one of his videos, where he had like a mass of dancers behind him as one of these pop extravaganzas that he was famous for, when he did his thing, and got a huge worldwide following. But he did one that was very, very dark. And of course, from my perspective, is a huge red flag when there's something that has this real dark tone to it. It had lots of what I felt were like satanic trapping
Hmm.
and kind of like a dark arts kind of feel to it with the symbolism and the imagery. And they were wearing these, like these horror masks, like almost like a mask of Satan look to it,
Right.
demonic. It had a demonic feel and
Right.
tone to it.
Right.
And a lot of the pop artists, the rock artists, flirt with that imagery because
Yeah.
I think they feel like it's kind of cool, like the shirts with the skulls on them and
Yeah.
so on. A lot
Yeah.
of bands have used.
Yeah. It's increasing.
But
It's part of it's a halftime entertainment at the Super Bowl now. All that kind of just
yeah.
kind of
Well,
an onslaught really in the last 20 years or so.
yeah. But my take on it, just for the record, is I view it with suspicion. And my first assumption is that it's likely to be an orchestrated, purposeful manipulation of those artists to comport themselves this way.
Yeah.
That it's not just a kind of a whim and they do it just as sort of a ploy to, gain a little audience in that niche, and kind of by turns appealing to one type of individual and then another and so on. Like you might dress up in blackface and do the minstrel thing, and then you might do a ball gown thing with tuxedos, to get the older ballroom dancer folks and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm suspicious there was something where he got corrupted along the way. So, maybe he'll speak to that. I don't know. So,
Yeah.
But I did want to mention it because I thought that was striking. And one of the things that happens to people is they get corrupted by these dark spirit forces. And I would really like to know in his case if that were so, because that is often the origin of predatory behavior in people.
Yeah.
It's not a human activity as a divine human being, as created to be an extension of the divine consciousness.
Yeah, and we've had testimony from light beings in that regard in the series. Notably would be Jeffrey Dahmer, Pedro Lopez, perhaps others. Those are the ones that stand out in my mind. In the case of Pedro Lopez, we actually had testimony there where he talked about multiple lifetimes being groomed for the one that he existed as Pedro Lopez, and his technique and his methodology and his rationale and a whole bunch of other strange things that were very counterintuitive when it came to what we thought about him. He wasn't somebody that I knew about like I did in Michael Jackson. In Michael Jackson's case, I remember I was 13 years old. I was in a new school in Hawaii. It was my first experience as a minority. I felt very isolated. It was a very scary environment for me. This is a place where someone would beat you up for a quarter and leave you lying on the ground, bleeding, incapacitated for 25 cents. And that was kind of like the order of the day in this school. In terms of treating how they treated little white kids, and so there I was. And one of the songs that was really popular at that time, it was in 1970, I think it was "I'll Be There." It was Michael Jackson singing this song with the Jackson 5. That's where he started. It was like a family band. It was a Motown hit. It was written by Berry Gordy, Hal Davis, Bob West, and Willie Hutch. The first three lines of that song were pretty notable in terms of it being a pop song. I didn't consider myself really a Michael Jackson fan. I used to call it tot rock, like for little kids. I was a little kid, but that's my impression of it, was that it was kind of like for kids that like to watch cartoons on Saturday morning, that kind of thing. But the first three lines of that song: "You and I must make a pact. We must bring salvation back. Where there is love, I'll be there." And I was telling Carl earlier, I said, that's like a gospel. Those are like gospel lyrics. That's about the divine realm. And I was wondering, why were you so attracted to that song? Well, it was number one. They played it all the time on the radio stations, in Hawaii when I was a little kid. But there was something very comforting about, having God in your corner, or somebody kind of backing you up when you were feeling scared and alone and threatened or whatever. And I think, well, maybe that was it. Maybe that why I like that song. Now the rest of the song is kind of in that same vein, but it is a love song between a man and a woman, or a young man and a young woman. But it wouldn't take too many lyric changes to turn this into a full-on gospel song about man and his relationship to God, or man or woman in relationship to God. So, and there's other songs from Motown that kind of fit in that category. I know Al Green had a few songs that I think were written initially as romantic love songs, but he had a change later in life where he kind of went to the gospel side of things. I think he may have taken a couple songs like that with him, where he kind of changed them into a gospel song. I don't know for sure about that, but that is a theme that pops up from time to time, and I thought that was kind of interesting. That was an interesting song for the Jackson 5 in many ways, if you want to look it up. So we have 5 questions for him today, and I think we're going to get into some of these areas that Karl discussed and that I discussed about his life and about how this all may have worked or not worked. And so with that, maybe we should go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, I think we've sort of talked about ourselves enough, so.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it's a proxy for many others, because everyone has a story, really, a Michael Jackson story. He was that big.
Yeah.
And like him or not, you were touched by him in one way or another. And it might have been his peculiar side, his strangeness in his behavior and demeanor and so forth. And that triggered a lot of people for a variety of reasons, but not without reason. So I don't want to, take more time.
Yeah.
And we'll let him talk about who he was and why. And maybe that'll bring some clarity and understanding that will help people who are sort of puzzled by him to understand and maybe have some compassion. And that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Because
and me too. I'm interested in the light being's, the divine realm's perspective on human experience. That exactly. If we can adopt some of that for ourselves, it stands to be very helpful for us in terms of, especially as it relates to healing. How should we think about this so we can make the world a better place?
Absolutely. And this is the thing people need more than anything, to remember that each human being is a child of God. That's just the reality. And they might be strange, they might be quite different from you, they may be deeply troubled, they might be someone who acts in a reprehensible fashion. But it's only temporary. It's a product of where they've come from, what they've been through, and maybe poor choices they've made along the way, or vulnerability they couldn't prevent or overcome that got them into a dark place. But it's not going to be forever. And the thing about it is, they will go on. It's like Jeffrey Dahmer shared with us. This is a guy who was a serial killer and a cannibal.
Right.
He would eat parts of his victims, and so. But he was saying that your law enforcement process is completely misguided. You can take them and send them off to be executed, but they're going to come back. And he said, I'm going to be back. I'm coming back.
Yeah.
So he's not had healing yet for who he was and how he got that way. It hasn't happened, and it will only take place here in the earth plane. Right. So we need to start thinking about, how can we help people get back on track before they leave, so that we get a jump start going. And that's what we try to do with our healing work, with our Lightworker healing protocol, to give healing to them before they leave, so they're better prepared next time, less likely to go down the same path again. So
yeah.
All right, so I'll go ahead and start and get into the state of consciousness needed to make the connection to him. I'll speak to him in the light through the creator of all that is. That's how I do my channeling. I go to creator and ask for safety around the work, to keep the communication precise, accurate, and then protected from outside interference. I don't want to be talking to an imposter or a lower level being, which channelers typically do because they're not mindful of safety. They're too trusting, they're too naive, and there are many interlopers eager to jump in and take over the reins, do a handshake with the channeler. And then they're essentially in a corrupted mode without realizing it. And there are a lot of sophisticated ones who can talk a good game. They can pretend to be highly spiritual. They can quote spiritual dogma, chapter and verse. And eventually there'll be a poison pill that comes up. And then things will go wrong. And in essence, a lot of the value is gone when these people are corrupted in this way, because you can't fully trust the message and you can't trust the messenger. And in addition to which, any following such people attract will get visited by those interlopers who are behind that, and they will be given attention and some hand-holding and an outreach, and that's not good. So just a word to the wise, and people who follow the series are tired of me saying this, but I do it for a good reason and a purpose, not to make myself look special. That's not the point. The point is we need to be careful.
Right.
You know, you need to have a filter. You need to take precautions.
Yeah, and channeling has a bad reputation for good reason. So to not address that at the outset is not really being responsible. And we don't know, as far as our viewers go, we don't know which is going to be the first video they see. This might be the first video they see. So this may not be convincing, but it still needs to be said.
Yeah, it still needs to be said, because we don't want to use this as the reason people run off to a bunch of other channelers thinking everybody can do something interesting and maybe important, and then end up with a lot of disinformation.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Okay.
So here we'll go. It'll just take me a moment, and he will announce when he is here.
Okay.
This is Michael Jackson.
Thank you for joining us. Was your death at your own hands, or were you killed or manipulated in some way to take your own life? Was your transition successful? Were you in need of a spirit rescue?
My death was at once natural and unnatural. I died before my time, chronologically, with respect to my life potential. But I died because of the abuse that I endured that dragged me down. People see me now as an abuser, and this is true. I am very sad to say, but will own up to directly and forcefully to support those who were my victims. And this is not to say others might not chime in and claim this dark status for reasons of their own. This can happen as well. But I will not shy away from all that happened to me. My self-abuse was directly responsible for my demise. And it was, in essence, a kind of karmic climax, a karmic culmination of previous lives leading to tragedy, and then my recent life as the Michael Jackson you knew, turning to substances of abuse to anesthetize myself from reality. I was always a lonely person and very fragile in many ways. And to have my reputation threatened was more than I could stand. And I yearned for an escape. My life became one of anguish and despair. This held me down and took me under in the end. It was not wholly my doing. I was also tormented greatly through being attacked directly by dark spirits. This was a figure of my entire life and a major force within me to create conflict, confusion, fragile emotional makeup, and unable to trust in most people. This at once separated me enough. I needed to fulfill myself in unnatural ways, and this led me astray further and further, all of which was encouraged by the darkness. When I passed, this continued and did hold me back as an earthbound spirit. So I needed much healing through a spirit rescue in order to finally see and join the beings from the light who came to rescue me. And it was indeed, as your compatriot described, that James Brown came to my side and I came to the light fully. This was a magnificent transition, and one that was such a contrast with my life and who I had become, that I will be forever grateful to all of you doing this work to rescue the downtrodden souls who struggle and who suffer so in limbo. This is a caution to all who would do dark doings and ignore their spiritual growth and their spiritual health. You do not want to experience being in the nothingness of limbo, unable to connect with anyone or anything, and then to be descended on by demonic spirits who are expert in torture and abuse and wreak havoc to undermine you totally and to create a physical torment as well as emotional. All that I did to others in the living will pale in comparison to what can be experienced at the hand of the demonic realm. They abuse and distort the living to the extent people are vulnerable. And that was true for me all during my life. My missteps, my mistakes were owing to this dark influence. And that is the fate that can befall anyone who does not have help to see and embrace a spiritual path and keep themselves strong through cultivating the inner love and being able to see the love in others and to be a giver of love. That is the best defense When love is weak, when love is absent, this creates room for the dark to come in.
Okay, thank you. Recently, a documentary was made that through victim testimony you were portrayed as a pedophile. Was this true, and if so, how did these behaviors develop as it relates to your karmic situation and the environment in your life as a wealthy entertainer on the world stage?